For 3,000 years, the galaxy moved forward, believing humanity was nothing more than a tragic memory. The official records all said the same thing. Humans were wiped out in the Great Purge, their worlds reduced to dust by the HFY Dominion. No human ship had been seen since. No human voice had echoed through the galactic networks. But now, something had changed. It began as a whisper in the void. The deep space listening post on the edge of the galactic core picked up an unusual signal, structured, ancient, and encrypted in a language no one had used in millennia. The station's AI decoded it, and the message spread like wildfire across the network. We remember. At first, the Galactic Council dismissed it. A hoax, they thought. A glitch. But then, the telescopes detected movement in the dark. At the edge of the Perseus expanse, beyond the dead systems once belonging to the human race, an unknown fleet emerged. Massive warships, unlike anything in modern records, drifted forward with silent purpose. Their hulls bore no insignia, no markings, except for one symbol, an ancient blue and green sphere, the Earth emblem. Panic spread through the Galactic Council. How was this possible? The humans were gone, erased from existence. If that was true, then who commanded these ships? Admiral Vorkan of the HFY Dominion was the first to respond. He had been raised on the stories of the Purge, taught that humanity was weak, a species that fought until its last breath, but ultimately fell before the might of the Dominion. Now, standing on the bridge of his dreadnought, he watched the grainy footage of the incoming fleet. His claws gripped the metal railing, his blood running cold. "They cannot be human," he muttered. "This must be some trick." Yet the reports continued. System after system, outposts went silent. Trade routes were abandoned. Ships that tried to approach the fleet disappeared, leaving only static-filled distress calls. A desperate emergency meeting was called at the Galactic Council Hall. Leaders of every major species gathered, their voices filled with fear. "We must make contact," the HFY ambassador growled. "If this is truly humanity, we must find out what they want." The message was sent, hailed on every known frequency. A simple request: identify yourselves. For hours, there was no response. The silence was deafening. Then finally, a single reply came through. A deep, cold voice, clear and full of something the galaxy had not heard in 3,000 years. "You took everything from us. Now, we return to take everything from you." The signal cut. The fleet changed course, and for the first time in 1,000 generations, the galaxy knew fear. Humanity had returned. A cold fear spread through the Galactic Council as the human fleet continued its silent march toward the core. No one could explain how they had survived. No one understood where they had been for 3,000 years. But one thing was clear: the fleet was real, and it was heading straight for the HFY Dominion. The HFY had always been the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Their empire stretched across thousands of star systems. They were the ones who had once declared war on humanity, believing them to be nothing more than another stubborn species refusing to submit. In the end, the humans had fought to their last breath, but the HFY had wiped them out, or so they had thought. Now, Admiral Vorkan stood on the bridge of his dreadnought, watching the incoming fleet on the holographic display. Their numbers were unknown. Scanners struggled to lock onto them, as if their technology was somehow interfering with detection systems. But what they could see was terrifying. Warships larger than anything the modern galaxy had ever built. They moved in perfect formation, their sleek black hulls absorbing light like ghosts in the void. Vorkan clenched his claws into a fist. They dare return. After all these centuries. His voice was low, but there was something else in it. A feeling he was not used to. Unease. "Send the first fleet to intercept," he ordered. "Let's see what these ghosts are truly capable of." His officers hesitated. Finally, his second in command, Commander Sulrath, spoke. "Admiral, What if they truly are human? Vorkan turned sharply. Then we will finish what our ancestors started. Selarath nodded, but he did not look convinced. Moments later, the Xeltar First Fleet, a force of 1,000 warships, was dispatched to meet the unknown enemy. The entire galaxy watched the battle unfold through live transmissions, desperate to see what would happen when the past met the present. The first encounter. The two fleets met at the edge of the Perseus Expanse, in the ruins of an old human colony world, one of many planets that Xeltar had burned to ash during the Purge. Now, it was nothing more than a dead husk, a silent reminder of a war long forgotten by all, except for the ones who had returned. The Xeltar fleet opened communications. "This is Admiral Valak of the Xeltar Dominion. You are trespassing in sovereign space. Identify yourselves, or be destroyed." Silence. Valak's mandibles twitched in frustration. "Humans, if you are out there, know that you face the same fate as your ancestors. Surrender now, and you may be spared." For a moment, nothing happened. Then a response came, not through words but action. The human fleet accelerated. No battle formations, no maneuvering, just a direct, relentless charge. The Xeltar hesitated, confused by the reckless advance. Valak, believing the enemy had lost their minds, ordered his ships to open fire. 1,000 beams of plasma and missile barrages lit up the void, tearing toward the human warships. But then, something impossible happened. The human fleet did not evade. They did not counterattack. Instead, they absorbed the hits. Their shields flared, their armor darkened, but they kept moving, untouched. And then they fired back. One shot from a human dreadnought hit an enemy battleship, and the Xeltar gasped in horror. The ship didn't explode. It didn't even break apart. It simply disintegrated, erased from existence, as if it had never been there. Panic spread through the Xeltar fleet. They had fought countless wars, faced countless enemies, but never had they seen anything like this. Their weapons did nothing, while the humans erased their ships with single strikes. Valak's voice trembled as he shouted, "Retreat, fall back." But it was too late. The human fleet had already surrounded them. The galaxy watches in terror. Across the galaxy, every major species watched the battle unfold through intercepted transmissions. Shock, disbelief, fear. The Xeltar Dominion, the strongest military power in known space, was being annihilated. The council chambers were filled with chaos. Diplomats and military leaders shouted over one another, arguing about what should be done. "They are too powerful," the Krell ambassador cried. "If they are truly human, then we have all made a terrible mistake." The Xeltar representative slammed his claw on the table. "We must unite. This is not just a threat to the Dominion. This is a threat to the entire galaxy." But even as they spoke, deep down, they knew the truth. The threat had already arrived. For thousands of years, the galaxy had moved on, believing humanity was nothing more than history. But now, the forgotten species had returned, and they were out for vengeance. The last transmission. Back on the battlefield, the final moments of the Xeltar fleet were broadcast across every known frequency. The last surviving ship, heavily damaged and barely holding together, sent a desperate message. "This is Commander Rathkor of the Xeltar Dominion. We surrender. We surrender." The response came, cold and merciless. "There is no surrender." The transmission cut out. The last Xeltar ship vanished from the screen, reduced to nothing. The battle was over. The human fleet did not stop. They reformed, adjusted course, and continued their march toward the core, toward the heart of the Galactic Council. The message was clear. Humanity had returned, and they were just getting started. The destruction of the Xeltar fleet sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The battle, if it could even be called that, had been over in minutes. Thousands of ships reduced to nothing. The Xeltar, once the undisputed rulers of the stars, had just suffered the greatest defeat in their history. And yet the human fleet did not stop to celebrate, did not broadcast any messages of victory. They simply continued forward, a silent force of vengeance moving toward the core worlds. Panic spread through the Galactic Council. Every species had heard the transmission. Every leader now understood that the impossible had happened. Humanity had survived, and they had returned with power beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. The XL-TAR Dominion, humiliated and crippled, scrambled to assemble their remaining forces, but the truth was already clear. This was not a war they could win. The Krell, the Vorth, the Sulari, all once neutral powers, began preparing for the worst. The Galactic Council held emergency meetings that lasted for days, but no one could agree on a course of action. Some argued for immediate surrender, others demanded an alliance to fight back. But the grim reality loomed over them all. No one knew where humanity had been for 3,000 years. No one knew what horrors they had endured in the darkness of space, and no one knew what they truly wanted. Deep in the void, the human fleet continued its advance. The few scouts that dared to approach them vanished without a trace. No signals, no wreckage, nothing. It was as if the ships were swallowed by the darkness itself. Whispers of fear spread among the outer colonies. Refugees fled from the border worlds, fearing they would be the next targets. Even the most powerful warlords of the underworld, those who thrived in lawless territories, began disappearing without explanation. The galaxy had seen war before. The XL-TAR Dominion had ruled with an iron fist. The Sulari had once waged a brutal civil conflict that lasted for centuries. But this was different. This was something far worse. There was no declaration, no negotiations, no demands. The humans had not spoken beyond their first warning. And yet, their actions spoke louder than any words. They were erasing the remnants of those who had wronged them. And they were doing it without hesitation, without mercy. The Galactic Council tried sending envoys, desperate to understand what the humans wanted. They reached out on every frequency, broadcasting in every language. But the response was always the same: silence. Then, just when the galaxy began to believe there would be no answer, a single transmission arrived. It was short, chilling, and final. A voice, neither angry nor emotional, simply stating the inevitable. The stars have forgotten what they feared. We will remind them. The transmission cut, and with it, the last hope for peace. The meaning was clear. Humanity had not returned for diplomacy. They had not returned for negotiations. They had come for justice, for retribution, for vengeance long delayed. And the galaxy, for the first time in history, had no idea how to stop them. The dread spread like wildfire. Entire civilizations that once thrived under the rule of the XL-TAR now trembled at the unknown force sweeping through the galaxy. The humans were no longer a myth, no longer a forgotten race lost to time. They were real, they were here, and they were unstoppable. Reports flooded in from across the frontier. Entire XL-TAR strongholds vanished overnight, reduced to nothing but silent, smoldering debris. Their once proud warships, the same ones that had crushed countless civilizations, were being hunted and obliterated like mere insects. The XL-TAR fleets that had ruled with arrogance for millennia now found themselves in disarray, scattered and broken. Their remaining warlords screaming for help that would never come. Their allies, who had once cheered at humanity's destruction 3,000 years ago, now found themselves in a terrifying dilemma. Should they stand with the XL-TAR, knowing that defiance would bring extinction? Or should they beg for mercy, hoping that humanity's wrath had limits? No one knew the answer. No one even dared to ask. The Galactic Council had never been so divided. Chaos ruled within their chambers. Some demanded an immediate surrender to the humans, pleading for negotiations before it was too late. Others, mostly those from species who had aligned with the XL-TAR in the past, refused to submit, convinced that the humans could still be defeated. But deep down, they all felt it. The cold, creeping realization, that no matter what choice they made, it might already be too late. Every military strategist who analyzed the battles came to the same horrifying conclusion. The humans were not fighting a war. They were executing a campaign of extermination, targeting the XLTAR with brutal efficiency. There was no hesitation in their attacks, no attempts to cripple or subdue. Every engagement ended with absolute destruction. Not a single human vessel had been lost. Not a single human soldier had fallen. The XLTAR, once the mightiest force in the known universe, was being erased from existence, system by system. And then, for the first time, a human message arrived, not to the XLTAR, but to the Galactic Council itself. It was broadcasted in every known language, across every frequency, reaching the leaders of every species at once. There was no image, no face to put to the voice, only a cold, unwavering message. For 3,000 years, you watched. You let them wipe us out. You let them burn our worlds. You let them erase our existence from the stars. And you did nothing. Now, you will understand the cost of your silence. The message ended, and with it, the last remnants of hope. The council members sat in stunned silence. The message had not come with demands. There was no offer for peace, no negotiations, no conditions. Humanity was not here to talk. They were here to deliver judgment. Panic gripped the weaker species. Some immediately turned on the XLTAR, severing all ties and even offering to aid humanity if it meant saving themselves. Others prepared for the worst, knowing that no alliance could protect them if humanity saw them as guilty. The XLTAR themselves, now a fractured empire of desperate survivors, made one final stand at the core worlds, the heart of their dominion, their last remaining fortress. They rallied their greatest fleets, mobilized every soldier, and unleashed weapons that had never been used before. This was their last chance, their final effort to stop the force that had returned from the void. And as the human fleet approached, silent and unstoppable, the galaxy held its breath. This battle would decide everything. The fate of the XLTAR, the fate of those who had stood by and done nothing, the fate of an entire civilization that had been erased and had now returned for vengeance. The XLTAR had gathered everything they had for this final stand. Their last remaining war fleets, planetary defense grids, orbital cannons, every weapon at their disposal had been prepared for the arrival of the human armada. They knew there would be no reinforcements, no allies willing to risk the wrath of the returned species. The other galactic powers had chosen silence, watching from the shadows, too afraid to interfere. Even their former allies had abandoned them, hoping that distance might spare them from the same fate. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. If humanity could erase the XLTAR, then nothing would stop them from turning their attention to the rest of the galaxy. The first sensors picked up the human fleet as it entered the system. There was no warning, no build-up, no grand speeches. They arrived in absolute silence, their dark ships moving with impossible precision. Thousands of vessels, each one an enigma of unknown technology, hovering just beyond the range of XLTAR weapons. For a moment, there was nothing but a tense, waiting stillness. Then the human fleet advanced. The XLTAR opened fire first, unleashing every weapon at their disposal. Energy beams, kinetic slugs, warheads powerful enough to shatter moons, all were hurled toward the approaching ships. Space itself burned as the sheer force of the XLTAR's desperation filled the void. And yet, it did nothing. The human ships moved through the storm of destruction as if it were nothing more than a light breeze. Their shields, or whatever technology they had developed in their 3,000-year absence, rendered the XLTAR's most powerful weapons useless. It was a slaughter. The first wave of XLTAR defenses collapsed within minutes. Planetary shields flickered and died. Warships detonated before they could even fire a second shot. The humans moved like specters of death, precise and merciless. Their weapons did not just destroy, they erased. XLTAR capital ships, once the pride of their navy, vanished in brilliant flashes, leaving behind nothing but empty space where they had once been. The defense stations orbiting their homeworld fell in quick succession, massive structures crumbling as if they had been made of sand. The battle had been decided before it had even begun. The Exceltar, for all their strength, for all their arrogance, were nothing before the force that had returned from the void. On the surface of the Exceltar homeworld, the ruling warlords watched in horror. Their last hope, their final line of defense, had lasted mere moments. Their once mighty empire was crumbling before their eyes. And then the final message arrived. A transmission broadcasted not just to the Exceltar but to the entire galaxy. A single sentence, spoken in a voice that carried no emotion, no rage, no satisfaction, only certainty. It ends now. The sky above the Exceltar homeworld darkened as human ships descended, not as conquerors, but as executioners. The world that had once burned humanity's home to ash would now face the same fate. The Exceltar, once the rulers of the stars, were about to become nothing more than a memory. And across the galaxy, every species watching understood one thing: humanity had returned, and their vengeance was not yet complete. The skies of the Exceltar homeworld burned. The final battle had ended before it had truly begun. What remained of their once mighty fleets was nothing but wreckage, drifting lifelessly in the void. Their defenses, their fortresses, the planetary shields that had once been impenetrable, all had crumbled under the relentless assault of humanity's silent, unstoppable force. But the battle was only the beginning. Humanity had not come for mere victory. They had come to deliver judgment. On the surface, the Exceltar warlords stood frozen in terror. Their entire race had spent 3,000 years believing humanity was gone, erased from existence, nothing more than a forgotten chapter in the history of the galaxy. Now that belief had been shattered. And with it, so had their future. They had no time to beg, no time to bargain. The humans did not open negotiations. There were no terms of surrender. There was only the slow, inevitable approach of the executioners. Massive human vessels entered the planet's atmosphere, their sleek, dark forms cutting through the sky like silent gods descending upon a doomed world. No weapons fired, no announcements were made, but every Exceltar knew what was coming. A deep, resonating hum filled the air, a sound that no one had heard in millennia. It was the same sound that had once filled the skies of Earth when the Exceltar wiped out the last human cities. Now, that sound belonged to humanity. Then the destruction began. It was not a bombardment. There were no explosions, no fire raining from the heavens. Instead, the very fabric of the planet itself began to break apart. Cities crumbled into nothingness. Entire landscapes twisted and shattered, erased by forces beyond the understanding of even the most advanced species. The Exceltar screamed, running in every direction. But there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. The same fate they had forced upon humanity was now consuming them, and no one would come to their aid. Their allies, their subjects, the empires that had once feared them, all watched from a safe distance, unwilling to interfere. And then the final horror was revealed. The Exceltar had always believed they were the greatest power in the galaxy, but in truth, they had only ever ruled over a dark age, a time when the true rulers of the stars had been missing. Humanity had not just survived in their 3,000-year absence. They had evolved. They had become something beyond war, beyond empire building. Their technology was not just superior, it was incomprehensible. They had not returned as warriors or conquerors. They had returned as something greater, something ancient, something inevitable. One by one, the cities of the Exceltar homeworld ceased to exist. The very molecules of their structures, their people, their history were unmade. It was not an act of war. It was not even vengeance. It was erasure. Humanity was doing to them what the Exceltar had once done to Earth, but with absolute finality. No ruins would remain. No graves, no wreckage, no remnants. The Exceltar were being erased from existence itself. And the rest of the galaxy, watching in horror, finally understood. This was not just about revenge. This was a reckoning. The species that had been wronged, forgotten, erased from the records of history, had returned, not to claim power, not to rule, but to make sure no one would ever dare to repeat the same mistake again. The lesson was being written in destruction, and every species was forced to read it. The message was clear. Humanity does not forget. Humanity does not forgive. Humanity will never be erased again. And as the last screams of the Exceltar faded into silence, the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see who would be next. The Exceltar homeworld was gone, not conquered, not occupied, erased. Where once a mighty civilization had stood, there was now nothing but empty space, a void where an empire had been. No ruins, no survivors, no trace that the Exceltar had ever existed at all. The final act of humanity's vengeance had been carried out with terrifying precision. And now, the galaxy was silent. Across countless worlds, rulers, warlords, and politicians sat frozen in fear. They had watched the destruction unfold, helpless to intervene, terrified that even speaking out against humanity's actions might draw their attention next. The most powerful empires, the ones that had once dictated the fate of the stars, suddenly felt insignificant. The balance of power had shifted, not through diplomacy, not through war, but through the sheer force of humanity's return. And then the message came. A single transmission sent across the entire galaxy. No visuals, no threats, just words spoken in a voice that carried no anger, no satisfaction, only certainty. We have settled our debt, but we have not forgotten the rest of you. For 3,000 years, you stood by as we were erased. You watched, did nothing, and then moved on as if we never existed. That time is over. The old order is gone. The age of cowards and tyrants is finished. If you wish to share the fate of the Exceltar, test us. Otherwise, step aside. We are taking back what was stolen. The stars belong to us again. The transmission ended, and across the galaxy, entire governments collapsed in fear. Some species immediately pledged loyalty, desperate to prove they had never been part of the Exceltar's crimes. Others fled into deep space, hoping to hide in the darkest corners of the void. A few foolish warlords still believed they could resist. They would learn soon enough that resistance was not an option. Humanity did not need allies. Humanity did not need diplomacy. They had returned as something far greater than an empire. They were a force of nature, a reminder that the dead do not always stay buried. The stars would never forget again.